There are 24 common and costly errors that many sellers of their Australian properties fall for, and it's particularly prevalent amongst overseas owners. You see, if you live in Australia, you're probably looking at property shows, you're probably looking at property blogs, reading property magazines, and so you probably have a little bit more of an understanding of some of the mistakes that you may not want to fall for when you come to sell your property. But if you've been an overseas investor and perhaps you bought your Australian property years ago before all the foreign investor taxes came in, and you've held it for 5 or 10 years, or you're an expatriate and you've been living in New York or Tokyo or Singapore, and you bought an investment property years ago and you feel that it's time to unload it. There are a lot of mistakes that you need to be aware of before you look at selling. And one of the most common, and I call this tip number 1, which is falling for the highest price agent. So what does that mean? I'll tell you. You see, once you fall for this one, there's only one way the price is going to go, and it's not up. This is one of the main ones that I say, and my 24 mistakes are not in any specific order. So this is not necessarily the most important one, but it is a very, very common one. You see, it's basically a jungle out there for listing agents. They need to sign people up to sell their properties. That goes without saying. But every time they go to see somebody to sign up a property, they could be competing with 3 or 4 or 5 or even a dozen other agents. It's usually 2 or 3. Most sellers, or they should, interview 2 or 3 selling agents. Many of them just choose the easiest agent, the one who's probably managing the property, their property management agent. But as I explained in other videos, that's a very, very common mistake. So let's assume that you're a seller of your Australian property and you are going to interview 2 or 3 potential selling agents. Well, it's very common and human nature to go for the selling agent who promises you the highest price, thinking you can get this high price. Even if you know deep in your heart it's unrealistic, it's still very tempting to sign up with that particular agent. Even though you know deep in your heart that that price is unrealistic, you still hold out a glimmer of hope that perhaps this great agent can get you this super high price. And so you sign up with them. And that probably helps explain why 1 out of every 3 Australian properties remains unsold for 3 months or longer. You see, this strategy of what we call in the business of buying your listing is really frowned upon by all the reputable agents. It's probably the one strategy that is most disliked by the reputable agents, and that is competitors or other agents trying to buy the listing by quoting an unrealistic price and then spending the next 1, 2, or 3 months trying to convince you to lower your price until it reaches the real selling price, which is the price that should have been quoted right from the beginning. So I hope this makes sense. It's very tempting to fall for the agent who promises you the highest possible price. Now, pricing is not an exact science, so there is no exact price what your property will sell for. And sometimes agents generally do get it wrong. They do believe the property can get this high price and they will give 100% to try and get it. But it is also a strategy used by the less reputable agents to try and get the listing. It's also really no coincidence that I found that the agents who quote the highest price to you for selling are often those who quote the lowest commission. And that, for many people, is an irresistible combination of a high price and a low commission. Let's sign. When do we start? And that, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, explains why 1 out of 3 properties in Australia remain unsold for 3 months or longer. And probably the worst part about that strategy is that if you in good faith signed up with the agent and then they spend the next 3 months convincing you to lower the price, your property becomes what is then known as a stale property. And a stale property is one that the bargain hunters, the vultures, the buyer's agents seek to grab because it's been on the market, it's a stale property, you've become more desperate to sell it, the agent convinces you the market is no good, whatever reason, and then you let it go for well below what you should have priced it for at the beginning. If you'd like to get a copy of all 24 of my selling mistakes for overseas investors, in the description below there will be a link where you can download that report.